Hi everyone, this is Shauna Charoso, RAYAC's Executive Officer, and this is my desk. In this monthly video blog, I go over questions that are coming across my desk every single day so we can have much smoother real estate transactions here in York and Adams counties. So, the topic that I have for you today is actually one that I've addressed before. So I'm going to call this the return of the earnest money deposit when there is a dispute, part 2. So when I first started doing this monthly video blog, it actually came from a joke that I said to one of my staff members that I get so many of the same questions all the time that I should just, tape record myself so I just have the play button sometimes when I get the same questions from members over and over again. And one of my staff members said, I think that's a great idea, and thus was born this video series. Well, probably the most frequently shared video that I have been sending back out to members has to do with when there is a dispute over the escrow money deposit and how that gets distributed and the mediation process that goes along with that. So if you haven't watched that first video, I'm gonna put a link in here, and I strongly suggest that you take a look at that and then come back here and visit me, and we'll get you the answer to the rest of this piece of it. So view that video about the earnest money deposit, because we're going to be talking about paragraph 26 in the Pennsylvania Agreement of Sale, called the Default, Termination, and Return of Deposits, back down to my favorite paragraph of 26, letter C. Now, this addresses when the listing broker has to return the funds to the buyer based upon timelines and criteria set up in this agreement of sale. And as part of this agreement of sale, there is a default. And it says that if there is a dispute over the entitlement to those earnest money deposits and it's unresolved within blank days, it defaults to 180 days. So if it is not resolved within 180 days, and the buyer requests on the 181st day that the funds be returned to them, the listing broker has to return those funds to the buyer unless the seller has taken the steps, or the buyer before that has taken the steps to file any mediation or litigation in regards to those disputed funds. So if the mediation or the litigation has been filed before that timeline, then the listing broker has to hold on to those funds until they have instructions from the court or the mediation process over how those funds should be released back to either the buyer and or the seller, or a combination of both. So the default is 180 days. What we're seeing here locally, and we've gotten this call in the past couple months, is where that number from 180 days has been changed to 1 day. So I'm not an attorney, I don't play one on TV, and I'm also not a broker in Pennsylvania. So this isn't legal advice, but just some common sense here is that if you're changing it from 180 days to 1 day, that gives very little time to the seller to file any mediation that may come as a result of a dispute over that return of that escrow money deposit. So I would caution you that and it also gives very little time that you might be able to negotiate and determine how we're going to release those funds if there is a dispute over it without having to go to mediation. But if you only make it 1 day, that leaves almost virtually no time to go through any type of negotiation process or for the seller to get that mediation process filed. So we've gotten this call at least 2 to 3 times in the past month where this has been changed to 1 day and the seller is left scrambling, trying to get the mediation paperwork filed and in on time before that 1 day expiration so that the funds aren't released back to the buyer. So what you need to be aware of is, as listing agents, because I've also had at least one of those conversations, is that the listing agent wasn't aware that the default date was changed. Of course, we need to read every line of the agreement of sale. So I'm cautioning you to be particularly cautious over this section and make sure you're paying attention. So was that default date changed from 180 to something else and to something smaller than that 180 day mark? And make sure you're pointing that out to the seller so that they are aware that if something were to happen, that the time frame in which they would have to file mediation would be much smaller if they don't want those funds to be released back to the buyer. Now, even if that timeline is smaller than 180 days and the buyer has requested that the listing agent give back those funds to the buyer from the entity who's holding the escrow funds, the seller does still retain the right to file mediation at any point forward. The seller doesn't lose that right. They can still file mediation. The difference is that the real estate company or whoever was holding those escrow deposits is no longer holding those funds. The funds are now been returned to the buyer. The seller would have to go through mediation in order to try to recoup or gain some sort of percentage of those escrow funds that the buyer now has back in their hands. So this is an important section and a timeline that you may want to think twice before you're reducing that all the way down, particularly to 1 day. And make sure both parties are aware of what they're giving up when they are lowering that amount from 180 days down to another number. So if you get that in your agreement of sale, as I always indicate, talk with your broker first. Make sure you're informing your seller of what those roles and responsibilities are. And make sure you're having a conversation so everybody's on the same page, because while we hope every single transaction goes to the settlement table, we all know that sometimes that doesn't happen, and you want to make sure that you're protecting the rights and allowing for at least enough time for the parties to negotiate a resolution, and if not, at least a reasonable amount of time that one of the parties might be able to file for mediation if they so choose to. So I hope you find that information helpful to you. If you ever have any other questions or topics that you would like for me to address in this video blog, please feel free to reach out to me because my doors and ears are always open to you. Thanks so much and have a wonderful day.